The house smelled the same. Old wood, dust warmed by sunlight. The faint trace of my mother's cooking that never quite leaves a place no matter how many years pass. I stood on the front lawn with my hands in my coat pockets, staring at the porch where my father used to sit every evening watching the street like it owed him something. It had been 3 days since the anniversary of their passing. 3 days since I'd stood in the cemetery alone, placing fresh flowers because no one else had bothered to come. 3 days since I'd driven back here to the only place that ever felt permanent in my life. And that's when I saw it. A sign, small, white, professional, for sale, under contract. I actually laughed at first. A short, confused sound. The kind you make when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing. I walked closer. The realtor's logo. A phone number. Fresh stakes in the ground, driven deep into soil I had shoveled with my bare hands decades earlier. That was how I found out. Not a call, not a conversation, not even a warning. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know. I am in my 60s. I've lived long enough to know when something isn't a misunderstanding, when it's a decision made without you on purpose. My stepbrother's voice answered when I called. "Oh," he said like he'd been expecting this moment. "You saw it." "Saw what?" I asked, even though my hands were already shaking. "The sale," he said. No apology, no hesitation. It was time. The place was just sitting there. I looked at the house again. The roof I'd repaired myself. The taxes I'd paid when they couldn't. The rooms where I'd put my own life on hold so theirs could move forward. "You sold it," I said. "We sold it," he corrected. "Me and your sister, equal shares, it's fair." Fair. That word did a lot of work for them. They were already there when I arrived later that afternoon, standing in the living room like guests who'd overstayed but decided they owned the place anyway. My stepsister leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me like she'd been waiting years for this moment. "You always thought this was yours," she said. "But let's be honest. You were adopted." There it was, the word they'd never stopped resenting. "I raised you," I said quietly. "I was barely out of my 20s when our parents died. I gave up everything so you could have something. And we appreciate that," my stepbrother said, smiling. "But appreciation doesn't mean ownership." They were proud. That was the part that cut deepest. Proud of the paperwork they thought they understood. Proud of finally doing something without asking me first. Proud of humiliating me in the one place that still mattered. "You should be grateful," my stepsister added. "You'll get your share, after everything clears." I didn't argue. When people are that confident, they don't hear warnings. I walked through the house one last time. The hallway where I'd taught them to walk. The kitchen table where I'd helped with homework instead of building a life of my own. The back room that had never become anything because I was always too busy fixing theirs. I nodded once. "Good," I said. "I hope it works out." They looked disappointed. I think they wanted anger, tears, a fight. What they didn't know was that I had handled every tax payment, every repair, every legal detail for years, quietly, reliably, because that's what you do when you're responsible, and because no one ever questioned me. I left without another word. That night I opened a folder I hadn't touched since the funeral decades ago. Not because I was angry, because I was curious. Curious how two people could be so confident while standing on ground they didn't fully understand. By morning I would make one call. Not to them, to someone who still remembered exactly how that house was protected. And why. By the time my step-siblings realized what they had sold, it was already too late to take it back. The folder was thinner than I remembered. That surprised me. I sat at the small desk by the window, the same one I'd used for years to balance bills and school forms and anything else that needed attention. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a decision you didn't make but are now forced to live with. Inside the folder were copies, deeds, letters, addendums, the kinds of documents people sign quickly when grief is heavy and trust feels permanent. Back then, I was in my early 20s. Our parents were gone, suddenly and completely. One accident, one phone call, and my life split into a before and an after. I remember sitting at that same desk while the lawyer explained things slowly, carefully, like I might break if he spoke too fast. You're the oldest, he'd said, and legally you're adopted, which means your status is different. Different, I had nodded. At the time, I thought that meant weaker. I had been wrong. The house had been placed into a structure meant to protect all three of us. On paper, it looked simple. Shared ownership, equal consideration, a future-proof arrangement so no one would be left behind. But buried in the language my step-siblings had never bothered to read, were conditions, responsibilities, triggers, the kind of clauses people skim because they assume trust will do the work instead. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. My phone buzzed, a message from my stepsister. We're meeting the buyers tomorrow, just keeping you informed. I stared at the screen for a long moment. They weren't informing me. They were flaunting it. I typed back one word. Understood. That seemed to unsettle her. Another message came almost immediately. You're being weird about this. I smiled faintly. People get uncomfortable when the person they expect to collapse stays calm. That afternoon, I made the call I'd been thinking about all night. The number was still saved. Some habits don't fade. He answered on the third ring. I was wondering when I'd hear from you, he said. We didn't waste time. I explained what had happened. The sign, the contract, the arrogance. There was a pause on the line. They didn't ask you? He said. No, I replied. They didn't think they had to. Another pause, longer this time. Well, he said finally, that complicates things for them. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief. Confirmation. They're about to find out, he continued, that selling a house isn't the same as selling authority over it. We spoke for less than 10 minutes. That was all it took. He told me what he needed. I told him where to find it. When the call ended, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, not from what they'd done, but from how long I'd carried them without ever asking if they were willing to stand on their own. That evening, my stepbrother called. His tone was casual, overconfident. You should come by tomorrow, he said. We can talk everything through. Clear the air, clear the air. I won't be able to, I replied. Why not? He asked. Because you're about to be very busy, I said. He laughed. You always talk like that. I always mean it, I replied. Silence. I hung up before he could respond. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of the old house one last time, not to say goodbye, but to remind myself of something important. I had given them my youth. I had given them stability. I had given them silence. What I hadn't given them was permission to erase me. And by the time the buyers sat down the next morning, someone else would be at that table too. Someone my step-siblings had forgotten existed. Someone who didn't forget paperwork. The sale was supposed to be routine, but before noon, a single document changed everything they thought they owned. The buyers arrived on time. That alone would have made my parents proud. They were the kind of people who believed punctuality said everything that words didn't. I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. I could picture the scene clearly enough. My stepbrother confident. My stepsister rehearsed. Papers laid out neatly on the table, signatures waiting like a formality. That's when the interruption came. Not dramatic, not loud. Procedural. A phone call first. Then a pause. Then a request for clarification. By the time my stepbrother realized something was wrong, the room had already shifted. I found out an hour later. My phone rang, and this time there was no smugness in his voice. They're saying there's a problem, he said. I let him speak. They're saying the title isn't clean, he continued. That there's an issue with authority. Authority. That doesn't make sense. My stepsister's voice cut in. We inherited it equally. I said nothing. You knew about this, didn't you? My stepbrother finally asked. Yes, I replied. Silence rushed in where confidence used to live. What did you do? He asked. Nothing, I said. I didn't have to. They didn't understand yet. Not really. They were still looking for a villain, a trick, something I'd pulled out of spite. But the truth was simpler than that. The house had never been theirs to move without consequence. Years ago, when grief was fresh and responsibility heavy, our parents had been careful. They had known I would shoulder the burden. They had known the others might not. So they'd structured things accordingly. I wasn't just an equal name on paper. I was the stabilizing condition. The one who paid the taxes when no one else could. The one who maintained the place when others moved on. The one who never stopped showing up. Those years mattered. Legally, Financially, decisively. By mid-afternoon, the buyers had stepped away, not angry, not accusing, just cautious. Caution is lethal to bad deals. My stepsister called again, this time alone. "You could have told us," she said. "I thought about that. You could have asked," I replied. Her voice cracked. "We didn't think you'd—" "I know," I said. "You didn't think I mattered anymore." That one landed. They came over that evening. Both of them. No spouses, no witnesses. The house felt different with them inside, smaller, temporary. "You always acted like this place was sacred," my stepbrother said. "We just saw it as an asset." "That's the difference," I replied. "I protected it. You tried to liquidate it." They tried reasoning next, then bargaining, then anger. "You're being vindictive," my stepsister accused. "No," I said, "I'm being consistent." I explained only what was necessary, not out of kindness, out of precision. The sale could not proceed without my authorization. Any transfer triggered reviews tied to years of tax filings, and certain clauses activated when decisions were made without unanimous consent. They had ignored all of it. "Can you fix this?" my stepbrother asked quietly. "Yes," I said. Hope flickered in his eyes. "But I won't," I added. That extinguished it. I didn't enjoy that moment, but I didn't shy away from it either. For the first time, they were seeing the cost of mistaking sacrifice for weakness. They left without shaking my hand. I locked the door behind them and stood there for a long time, listening to the house settle. By the next morning, word had spread. The deal was dead, and my step-siblings were about to learn that some mistakes don't come with undo buttons, only lessons. When the sale collapsed, they thought the worst was over, but the real consequences hadn't even arrived yet. The calls didn't stop after the sale collapsed. They multiplied. Voicemails, messages, missed calls stacked on top of each other like panic trying to sound reasonable. My stepbrother shifted tones first. Gone was the arrogance. In its place came urgency dressed up as concern. "We just need to straighten this out," he said in one message. "No one's trying to hurt you." That part almost made me laugh. My stepsister tried a different approach. "You know we never meant to cut you out," she said. "We assumed you wouldn't mind." Assumed. That word had followed me my entire life. I had been assumed into responsibility, assumed into silence, assumed into gratitude for being included at all. I didn't return any of the calls. Not because I was angry, Peniyot, but because nothing productive happens when people are still negotiating with reality. Instead, I let the process continue. The next step wasn't dramatic, it never is. It was administrative. Letters sent, notices issued, accounts reviewed, the kind of movement that doesn't make noise until it's too late to stop. Within days, the truth surfaced in places my step-siblings hadn't expected. Unpaid obligations they thought had been handled. Deferred responsibilities they didn't realize were tied to continued compliance. Years of quiet structure finally doing what it was designed to do when trust failed. They came to the house together the following weekend. This time they didn't walk in like owners. They stood on the porch. I opened the door and waited. "We made a mistake," my stepbrother said quickly. My stepsister nodded beside him. "We didn't understand everything." I stepped aside and let them in, not as an invitation, as closure. They sat where our parents used to sit. That seemed to shake them. Memory has a way of sneaking into moments like that. "We didn't think it would go this far," my stepsister said. "It didn't go far," I replied. "It went exactly where it was always going to go." My stepbrother ran a hand through his hair. "You don't have to destroy us over this." Destroy. Another exaggeration. "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "You exposed it." They tried emotion next. Reminders of childhood, of shared history, of sacrifices I'd made. That was the hardest part, hearing my own life recited back to me as leverage. I listened, quietly, completely. When they finished, I spoke. "You're right about one thing," I said. "I did give my life to make sure you were settled. I did everything I could so you wouldn't have to struggle." They leaned forward. "And that's exactly why this ends now." Confusion crossed their faces. "I won't spend the rest of my life fixing the consequences of your choices," I continued. "This process will finish. The house will be handled correctly, and when it does, I'm stepping away." My stepsister's eyes filled. "You can't just walk away from family." I looked at her steadily. I walked toward it my entire life, I said. This is me walking away for the first time. They left quieter than they arrived. That night I sat alone in the living room surrounded by memories I'd protected for decades. For the first time I didn't feel responsible for what came next. I felt free. The following week the final confirmations came through. No more gray areas, no more assumptions. Everything was exactly where it belonged. And my step-siblings were about to understand that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it means preparation. When the paperwork finished closing its grip, they realized apology alone wouldn't save them. And that's when desperation set in. Desperation changes people. It strips away pride first, then excuses, then whatever story they've been telling themselves to sleep at night. By the time my step-siblings reached that stage, they no longer sounded like the people who had mocked me in that living room days earlier. They sounded afraid. The first knock came early in the morning. Not loud, not confident, careful. I opened the door and found both of them standing there, not alone this time. Their spouses stood slightly behind them, and between them, holding hands, were their children, my nieces and nephews. That was not an accident. They knew exactly what they were doing. "We just want to talk," my stepbrother said. His voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I stepped aside and let them in. The children looked around the house with curiosity, unaware of the weight pressing down on the adults around them. One of the younger ones smiled at me and ran ahead. Already comfortable, already familiar. That almost broke me. They sat together on the couch, the children on the floor, the adults stiff, rehearsed. Then it happened. My stepsister slid off the couch first, then my stepbrother. They knelt, grown people, parents, professionals, on their knees. "I'm sorry," my stepsister said, her voice shaking. "We were wrong. About everything." My stepbrother swallowed hard. "We didn't think. We didn't appreciate what you did. We forgot who carried us." Forgot. I looked past them at the children. One of them waved at me, unaware of the transaction happening around her. I felt anger rise, not hot, not sharp, but heavy. The kind that comes when you realize someone has tried to use innocence as leverage. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step back. I waited until they finished. Then I spoke. "I forgive you," I said. They looked up, relief already forming. "But not for you," I continued. Confusion replaced hope. "I forgive you for them," I said, nodding toward the children. "Because they didn't choose this and because they loved their uncle." The room went silent. "I gave my life to make sure you were settled," I said calmly. "Education, stability, opportunity. I never asked for repayment. I only expected respect." My stepbrother bowed his head. "You lost that," I said, "completely." Their spouses shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't expected this part. "I won't reverse what's already in motion," I continued. "That chapter is closed." My stepsister's face crumpled. "Then what happens to us?" I reached into the drawer beside the table and placed an envelope down. Inside was a set amount, clearly defined, carefully structured. "This," I said, "is for their children. Education, needs, a start, nothing more." My stepbrother's hands trembled as he reached for it. "This is not support," I added. "It's a boundary." I stood up. "I forgave you the moment I decided to stop carrying you," I said. "That's the last thing I'm giving." The children hugged me as they left. One of them asked when they'd see me again. "Soon," I said softly, but I knew better. When the door closed behind them, the house felt lighter than it ever had. The next day I finalized everything. No more shared responsibilities, no more quiet sacrifices, no more deferred living. I packed a single suitcase. That evening I stood in the empty living room one last time. "I gave all my life to make you settled," I said out loud, even though no one was there. "Now it's time to live my own." I turned off the light and walked out. They thought forgiveness meant return, but what I gave them was something far more final, an ending. I didn't leave in anger. That surprised me. I had imagined that walking away would feel heavy, like tearing something loose from my chest. But when the morning came, it felt quiet, ordinary, like a door closing exactly when it should. I drove out of town before the streets filled. No destination planned beyond distance. The house faded in the mirror, not dramatically, not painfully, just smaller, then gone. For the first time since my early 20s, there was no one waiting on me to solve something. No one expecting me to fix what they had broken. That freedom took a while to register. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a life that felt unfamiliar but honest. I moved into a modest place near the coast, nothing impressive. A view of the water, morning light, space enough for my thoughts. I started doing things without explaining them to anyone. Long walks, books I'd meant to read for years, coffee in the middle of the afternoon just because I felt like it, silence that didn't demand anything from me. My step-siblings tried to reach out once more, a message, carefully worded, thankful, regretful. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, out of completion. Forgiveness doesn't require access. Sometimes it requires distance. I heard through others that they were struggling, that the money from the failed sale had never materialized, that plans had changed, that life felt heavier without someone quietly carrying the load. That was the point. The money I set aside for their children went exactly where it was supposed to. School fees, supplies, small opportunities that compound over time. I checked once, then let it go. I did my part. The children sent drawings, short messages, simple affection, untainted by the mess their parents created. I kept those. Everything else I released. One evening, as the sun slipped low over the water, I realized something that caught me off guard. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't even sad. I was proud, not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped confusing sacrifice with love. Love doesn't demand erasure. Family doesn't require submission. And forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the place that broke you. I had given them my youth. I had given them my strength. I had given them decades of my life. And then, at last, I gave myself permission to stop. Some people think victory looks like punishment. They're wrong. Sometimes victory is walking away with your dignity intact, your conscience clear, and your future finally your own. That was enough for me. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.